Support for Docs Outside the Box comes from Set for Life Insurance. Set for Life means set for less. Their clients get access to the largest portfolio of discounts and unisex rates available nationwide. Check them out at setforlifeinsurance.com and tell them Dr. Darko sent you.
Welcome to Docs Outside the Box podcast. This is your official show, looking inside the minds of cutting-edge and innovative doctors. Think you'll find these stories in any medical textbook? Sorry. You're getting real life insight from men and women pushing the envelope beyond medicine. Ordinary doctors doing extraordinary things. Let's start now with your host, Dr. Nee Darko.
What's good, everyone? This is Dr. Nee here. So listen, on the surface, there are a lot of ways in which we're all connected. Very obvious ways like sports teams that we root for, music that we listen to, geographical location. But if you scratch the surface, if you go below the surface, there are a lot of nuanced ways in which we're related also. So folks who are from immigrant families, you're going to know what I'm talking about, right? Like, you know that there's a certain culture, there are certain practices that most families abide by when they come to the United States. And that doesn't matter what country you're from. So personally for me, when I was much younger, growing up in Queens, New York, before me and my sister went out to go and play, we just knew that, look, we couldn't do anything stupid that'll get us and the entire family deported, right? And we laugh about it now, but that was a real fear back then, right? Another practice is, you look at the parents who sacrificed a lot to come to the United States. Usually that bill was paid by us, the first generation kids, and we were pressed to take very safe jobs. There really wasn't that room to quote unquote figure things out in life and just kind of end up where you ended up, right? Things and positions and jobs like being a teacher, an engineer, doctor, lawyer. You get what I'm saying? All of those things were kind of pushed on us. And that story really helped me to connect with our next guest called the Crispy Doc. He's an anonymous physician personal finance blogger who I met last year at FinCon in Florida. And his mission, he's out to demystify personal finances for you young docs out there. But he's got a greater mission for you docs out there who are in the middle of their career and are suffering from burnout. He's teaching you how to reclaim your time by controlling your finances, right? So I love how he uses his personal story of burnout to really relate and connect with his readers. And it's definitely a blog that I recommend to you all. I think you all are going to enjoy this conversation. Please make sure you share this with others. And without further ado, I present the Crispy Doc. The Crispy Doc, welcome to Docs Outside the Box. What's up? What's good?
It's great to be here, Nate. Thank you so much for having me and for the opportunity.
So just like other personal finance bloggers, you are anonymous. I don't even know what number I used to get in touch with you. And you have your cape on and your and your cowl on.
I think I fight less crime than you give me credit for, but I appreciate it.
Fighting the crime of personal finance and debt for doctors. Come on, that's important.
There's a lot of crime out there. A lot of crime.
So we met at FinCon earlier this year in Florida and we connected. And I really kind of felt like we kind of had a connection. Like I really enjoyed your story. You really shared your story about being an ER physician and, going through certain changes and having an epiphany and where you are now. And I thought that was really, I don't know, it just resonated with me. And since then, and it's been almost half a year now, I've always wanted to get you on the show to kind of talk, not just about your pursuit of financial independence, but just that transition and certain realizations, because I think you explained to me how much of a high achiever you are prior to this. And to kind of have that change in mindset took a lot of work, took a lot of self-reflection. So wanted to get all of that stuff in there. And I'm sorry for telling your story, my bad, but why don't you just...
I'm happy. You tell it so much better than I could. I'm more than happy to use your charisma and your voice for it. So
the Crispy Doc, why don't you go ahead and tell us about you, man, please?
Absolutely. So I'm an emergency physician. I'm married with 2 kids and I'm living in Southern California. And I probably went through something that a lot of people can relate to. Came from a middle-class family, in my case, a Latin family, sort of a loud, smothering kind of love. I was the oldest of 3 siblings, or of 4 total siblings, had 3 younger siblings. My folks were together, and my grandparents were a big fixture in my life. We saw them at least weekly, oftentimes more than once a week. So you kind of get this sense of this really tight, strong, loud, cohesive family unit that we were. And that was my experience growing up. And fast forward to today, I think my folks really imparted a sense that education was the way to get ahead. Became an emergency physician, met and married another emergency physician. We've got 2 kids and things should have been great by all accounts. Things were great on paper, but there was something that was missing. And I found myself in this kind of mid-career rut where I felt like medicine was this jealous mistress that just would not allow any time for all those things that I ostensibly was working for, right? I was working because I wanted to have that time with these people I loved, right? Think about, let's put it this way, Nate. Think about all the things that preoccupied your time. For me, it was in my 20s. I mean, for you, it might have been younger, earlier, depending on your story. But, you wonder like, who am I going to marry? Where are we going to live? What am I going to do? Will I have a family? These were like the big questions. I was one of those kids who at age 16 was probably, thinking like a 40-year-old a little bit more and more relatable in that way. And so these big questions were finally answered. I should have been at this high point in life. Everything was coming together and I was just empty. I was running on fumes. There was a period in work where we were understaffed. And for folks who, plan for disasters on a regular basis, we weren't doing a great job of planning for the contingencies that came with staffing a busy ER. And as a result, 2 years' time just ground down, working way more than we wanted to be. And something had to change. And I think I got to the point where I went to my wife. I said, look, I don't think I can do this much more at this level. And she supported me and was great. And that happened around the time that I came across this article in the New Yorker on Mr. Money Mustache, who's kind of like the gateway drug blogger for a lot of financial independence types.
Oh, yeah.
Drank that Kool-Aid, read the entire blog within probably 3 days, like over 100 posts.
I was about to say, that's a lot of posts.
It was like a conversion experience. I was born again financially. That's the only thing I can compare it to is I had found my religion and it was going to be financial independence. I was going to dig my way out of this hole. So I fell in love with this movement. I fell in love with the ideas behind it. I started reading voraciously and thought, I think I can do this. And up until this time, like a lot of docs, finance was something that I was grateful that I had the ability to deny that it was going to be my fault if it fell apart. We had a guy, I'd gotten the name of this guy from a friend at work. She'd said, he'd done right by her. He seemed nice. He wore suits.
That's my guy. He's my guy. He's my guy. He'll take care of you.
Well, that was the thing, right? And, it's interesting because there's a New York Times article that just came out, I think, a couple of days ago that looked at male versus female financial advisors. The females do better. They don't do as many high volume trades. And so their clients do better. So, it's funny. People always talk about, I've got this guy. Like, we should be talking about, I've got this gal. Like, that's who's going to do better by us statistically and historically. And we don't tend to give that the credit we deserve. Anyway.
I'm pretty proud of it, though. Me and my wife, we have our financial advisor is a woman and she does a great job. But we have been very open and honest with her and let her know that, it's going to be a finite relationship, right? Because we want to become independent, do-it-yourselfers. And she's really open with that, and she's been really great about that. And she understands that we're really aggressive. So I saw the face when I said that we had a personal, I know you're going to be like, well, mistake number, so.
It's not though. It's not. It's like you were talking about, your intro was, hey, you went through these changes. Like finance is it's a puberty. You go through financial puberty, right? Like first your voice changes a little bit. You sprout a few hairs. You're like, my body's changing. Like my ability to understand and control my finances is changing. And that evolves over time and people get there at different rates. And some folks never get there, right? Like, I think docs as a whole, we're like 10 or 1 when it comes to finances. It's pretty bad.
I love it. I've never heard that before.
We should be much further along. And instead, we don't quite get it. And we're not able to roll with that. And part of it is people generally don't have the interest, right? Because they call economics the dismal science. Finance is like, it's a dull thing. Except, of course, that your entire future depends on it, where suddenly it becomes really relevant. And for me, it took getting to burnout to realize that I needed to take the reins of that.
Let me ask you a quick question now, because you mentioned burnout, but I think the key thing that I want to get from you also is tell me about your personality before you got burnt out. Because I remember you said that you were in so many different committees. Weren't you doing international work also? Like you were the guy in your department, even going through medical school. People identified you as an overachiever. So tell us about that, because I think that helps you to be relatable, because there's a lot of pre-med students out there like that right now. There's a lot of medical students out there like this right now.
So that probably has to do a little bit. Everyone's got their family baggage that they carry around, right? And their family's hopes and dreams and expectations. So I came from an immigrant family, and I think a lot of the immigrant families are going to relate to this, right? Where, on part, you feel like you've got all that weight of establishing your family in their new country and making sure that that's successful. And, I like to joke with my friends who are also from immigrant families that, oh no, we had all the freedom that any other immigrant kid has. We could choose what kind of doctor, lawyer, or engineer we wanted to be because the family really wants to push those sort of secure and stable professions. So my family on my mom's side, if you go back 2-3 generations, you had folks coming from Europe who were devastated by World War II. Basically, the Nazis just killed the family, came out with nothing. had to hop countries a few times and ended up in Mexico. On my father's side, when the Cuban Revolution came, they lost everything all over again. The take-home message from both of those experiences was, you know what, the only asset that you take with you, the only thing that you can invest in that no one else will take away is your education. So by the time we were here, that was family mantra drilled in from both sides. And as a result, there were some benefits and some drawbacks to that. I'd say the drawbacks were people wanted us to excel in our studies, and so they shielded us from everything else. First time I had a car, my dad was, one day he comes up to me and 16 years old, kind of got mom's station wagon to start driving my brother's school. And my dad says, straight face, have you exchanged the air in your tires? And I was like, oh my God, I don't even know what that is. Like, I could have killed us. How could that be? And he goes on with this for, 5-10 minutes. My sister's next to him. She's like, I don't even drive yet. She's younger. And I know to exchange the air in your tires. And I'm like, I am so sorry. Who do I go to? Where's the mechanic? Like, does someone do that for you? Do I do that myself? And then they both burst out laughing. And so I didn't have the street smarts and things like that. We were kind of protected from a lot of the things that most other people just know with common sense. But as a result, I was able to channel all that energy into my studies. So the best way to say that is, I did the right thing because that was all I knew to do, because I was reinforced in it by family, because I was kind of a geeky kid, a nerdy kid to begin with. And so I loved science. I had these incredible high school biology teachers, and they just pushed me to want to learn more. And when I was trying to learn more, I figured, what do people do with that? Started volunteering in the hospital, happened to be a Sunday school teacher. One day I'm in the hospital, and because I spoke Spanish as my first language, I was translating for a family in the ICU. Well, hey, it turns out that there's the father of one of my Sunday school kids who was a pulmonologist about to bronch someone. And he says, hey, when you're done there, come on over here. Puts on a student scope, lets me look in as he's bronching this patient. And I thought, this is the coolest thing in the world. I want to do this. So I had these opportunities, but I was also able to really emphasize them and focus on them. So getting back to your question, I'm sorry, I'm digressing a little bit. So ended up going to Stanford for undergrad, to UCSF for med school, UCLA for residency, Harvard for fellowship.
It's a high-powered resume.
Well, it's high-powered, but it's a double-edged sword, right? Because I was high-powered and I loved it. And I felt like, look, I was not the smartest person by any stretch of the imagination, but I could work my butt off as well as anyone else.
Real quick question, because I kind of know your age, so to speak. If you were at that age and you went to Stanford, did you know Sean, whoever created Napster, or even...
So I didn't know those guys, but it was around that time. Basically,
right.
Medicine was what the underachievers did for that 5 to 10 year period. I had a friend who was like, hey, a good friend in college who said, yeah, I can't get a credit card because I've moved so many times with all my startups. I've got this huge assets, but no one trusts me because they think I'm a flight risk of some sort. The Google guys were there. Yahoo was started. There was another search engine called Excite that was starting up at that time, where I had a friend who was dating one of the Excite guys. That was a big deal. So those sorts of things were around everywhere, right? The surgical intern who I was rotating under was like, I just invested, instead of investing in retirement, I bought as many shares of pets.com as it was crazy. It was crazy. So it was a weird time.
Working right now.
I don't think he's hit early retirement, at least not with the pets.com stuff.
Right.
But it was interesting because there was that mania, and then that was followed by the bubble bursting. And suddenly I was in the Bay Area and the bottom dropped out. And, also my investing chops were started when I was investing in the S&P 500 from, I think, till 2000 to about 2009. It was flat. I would invest and my money would go down despite the investments for a number of years. And you just had to kind of have faith and be oblivious enough to tolerate that. So back to the question at hand, it was this time where I was really enthusiastic, had this high achieving drive that I wish I had today. I don't know where it went. Maybe it's channeled in other ways. But it also, the people around you were really holding out shiny brass rings, and you didn't necessarily know if it was your goal or theirs to pursue them. So I was really lucky in med school. I was able to get some experiences abroad. I spent some time in Argentina at a hospital in Buenos Aires. I spent some time in China as an exchange student in Beijing at Peking Union Medical College. I spent some time in Nairobi at the Nairobi Hospital. And I spent some time in Indonesia and Bali at a clinic there. And I felt like all those things really, they pushed me down this path that maybe I wanted to do international public health, international medicine. So I pursued that. I got my MPH. I spent actually a significant amount of time in Ethiopia. And it's interesting because I crossed paths with, this is where you feel like, wow, you had this real privilege by virtue of this drive and this sort of the connections that kind of education gave you, where the current director general of WHO is a guy named Dr. Tedros. When I met him, he was a regional health director in Tigray province in northern Ethiopia. He's now the director general of WHO. Like, I sat down with that guy for coffee.
Mhm.
It's amazing that he was this sort of intellectual titan, and I had access to him early on. And I crossed paths with these interesting people. I pursued these shiny brass rings. I found these heroes. I just knew that I wanted a family life, that coming from that real tight knit Latin community, I felt like I wanted to have something where I was going to have time for my kids. I was going to be around my wife. And I couldn't find people who were able to cobble together the sort of life that I wanted and that I envisioned. So about that time, I felt goofy in love with my wife. We met. We ran away to California, started a family, and both took community jobs that were fantastic. I'm very lucky to say I'm still with the same group that I ran out here to join probably almost 15 years ago. And it's this unicorn democratic group, which in emergency medicine is hard to find. They're great people. They elevate my practice. I enjoy their company. But, there was also work trying to figure out, how do I fit into the structures and the institutions that are very traditional and that are resistant to change over time? And how do I figure out, when I hit this point of burnout, like, I wasn't sure, was this going to mean I have to leave this job with all these people that I adored and with this place that really had made me the emergency physician I am? Were they going to be able to change and adapt to my needs? That was a hard moment.
How did those conversations go? Because, I got to assume the first person that you brought these concerns up to were your wife and then eventually to your partners. How did those conversations go, specifically with your partners?
With my wife, definitely. I feel like, I married out of my league. Having met Renee, I could say...
I know something like that, yeah.
Yeah, you can relate. And I think the conversation with the partners were difficult. I basically led on. I said, look, I'm really worried, not in a good place right now. And I'd like to explore options for change. And I started out by reaching out to partners I thought would be sympathetic to me. I reached out to colleagues who, it broke down in different demographics. We had the sort of very traditional single breadwinner families where the spouse would stay at home and took care of all the other logistics. And so, hey, if you need to work 5 more shifts this month, well, someone else is going to take that on the back end, but that was the deal you signed up for. Then there were 2 physician households where basically physician number 2 did not necessarily think that by virtue of having ovaries or by virtue of not being in our group, they were suddenly going to be required to pick up the slack. And finally, there were the young guns who were kind of fresh, not really attached, hungry, and had a lot of energy. And I had to come up with a plan that sort of satisfied all their needs. So I started reaching out to basically people who were brighter, more popular, and better liked than I was. And I said, hey, I have this idea. What do you think if instead of all of us taking the same shift load, which is what it had been for a decade since I'd been there, we tried to tailor it to individual needs? Like, let's not pretend that one size fits all here. And maybe that will accommodate people in different life stages a little bit better. You want to pay off debt. You want to save for a down payment. You can work a little more. You have private schools or financial obligations that are a little bit, more demanding. You can work a little bit more. You need to recharge your batteries and you're feeling a little burnt out. You can back off a little bit. And that conversation was slow and it was long, and I had to build allies and I had to build support, and I had to put together something that was not threatening to the status quo, because the people who it worked for, they kind of took the attitude of, look, if it ain't broke, why am I fixing it?
Right.
And, they felt a little bit threatened that, hey, why would I potentially disrupt what they had going on? In the end, it turned out that we were able to push through policy in a way where, luckily, again, like I said, I work with great people. They were willing to listen and hear me out. We went back and forth for a long time. Not everyone got what they wanted, including me. There were some concessions made on all sides, but we pounded out something where I'd say probably 85-90% of the docs in the group were happy with the outcome and felt like they had something that they could live with. And I think that was the take home was, I came into it thinking medicine is binary. You either kill yourself and work for a great group, or you work much less, but you work in a capacity where you're, exploited in other ways. You don't have the benefits of being in a group that respects you in a situation where you're treated well. And I feared that it was going to be binary. And that was the biggest surprise to me. It's not binary. You can actually build your reality. You can create it, but it takes time. And, there are different ways to do it. I'm a revolution from within kind of guy. I worked very slowly over a period of years to change the institution from within. And that worked for me. And I can't speak to other ways of doing it. I'm also more a consensus builder than a confrontational person. So I think that worked to my strengths as well.
So speaking of building, obviously you're building a consensus as your job and building a new policy. What gave you the impetus to go ahead and start your blog? When did you start that? Why did you start that? Let's hear more about that.
So I was telling you, I wish it were more organized manner. The excitement of finding that there's a way out, that when you're at that low, And there are a lot of docs who I think can relate to this. When you're in this low spot where you're earning a high income, you've been working for years to get here, you're sort of late out of the gate compared with all your friends who went into finance or whatever other, insert high earning comparison field here 10 years earlier. You feel like you're behind, you feel like you're underwater, and maybe you're lucky and the other parts of your life line up, but you don't have the time to enjoy those parts of your life. It can feel like you're really stuck and in a rut. And for me, discovering that whole financial independence FIRE movement was a way out. When I originally found it, I wanted out of medicine. I was going to figure out my exit was going to be to save up as much as possible, build my nest egg to whatever the launch time was. And then once I hit my number, get out of Dodge and go on to Act Two. And the blog was really zealots' excitement at the new religion they converted to. I wanted everyone to know this. I wanted to extend a helping hand down to all the other people that I'd seen who were stuck and see, hey, if any of them found me on the web, this was the way out. It was through financial literacy and through sort of taking control of your finances. You could take control of your time.
The question I have is, that's great. You want people to find out what's going on. You want people to read. You want to praise what you got to say from the hills, so to speak, right? Why take the anonymous route? I just want to know why.
The anonymous route was because I felt like I could tell my story, but I didn't necessarily know that folks at my hospital wanted me to tell theirs from my perspective. Yeah, and I respected that. I did not want to put myself in a position where people would feel uncomfortable with me revealing things that they felt were inappropriate or too personal. So I thought, hey, if I can do this through the guise of anonymity, I can basically maybe share a little bit of my playbook with folks or share a little bit of, as it turns out, a number of people's playbooks to help people get out of their ruts. So, financial literacy, there are great resources out there. There's White Coat Investor, there's Physician on Fire. There are a lot of places that will give you that information with very granular detail. I was not going to suddenly replace the White Coat Investor. And, I started in 2016. He started in 2011. I was not going to have some sort of advantage in telling you how to fund your backdoor Roth IRA over him. What I could do, and where I think people could relate to me, was if you were hit with burnout, if you were looking to cut back on your job, or if you saw, hey, I just need to get out, that was something where I think people could relate to my story, perhaps in a way that was a unique connection. And that's where I thought, if I can tell this story, I can first off hold myself accountable to these things that I want to do. It evolved. I started out just being so excited about the finance component. And then what it turned into is, as I was able to cut back more, I found this weird thing where I fell back in love with medicine,
Smirking again, coming to work and getting that excitement back.
I was like, tonight, honey, I'm going to light a candle, put on some Barry White, like medicine and we're going to get it on again. It's going to be good. I thought that I was going to leave it and never look back. And as I did less of it, I felt like I was able to do it more humanely. I could recharge my batteries in between. The things that fall by the wayside, like relationships, connectedness to your community, fitness, frankly, all those things suddenly fell into place. And I felt like, wow, this is actually much more sustainable and a much better way to practice medicine than what I was doing before. And maybe instead of just slamming the door shut, what I need is a little glide path out. And I've actually started a series now up to about a dozen posts, some of which are still waiting to post in the coming weeks and some of which have already posted, of docs who cut back.
Yeah, that's my favorite series. I was actually going to ask you about that, docs who cut back. Well, first of all, the reason why I like the series is I think it's great to get that knowledge, the dogmatic knowledge. You need to save this. You need to go here. You need to invest there. That's good. But oftentimes I think we learn better when we see other people go through certain situations, right? And that's the reason why your series of docs who cut back, that always resonates. You learn from people's personal experiences. So I want to know, what's the common theme that you've noticed? I think so far you already have 8. You may have a little bit more. I may be wrong.
Yeah, 8 out as of this week and another 4 ready to drop. So
what's the common thing that you've noticed among these docs?
It's interesting. The vast majority of them didn't start off. They started off as workhorses. These were people who were, they pushed themselves and they were, up there, both best and brightest and also entrepreneurial. They had business skills that I frankly don't have, and that they were able to, become rainmakers for their groups. But they also pushed themselves. And I think in some cases, maybe pursued shiny brass rings that other people held up to them. For some of them, it was, hey, look, I came from a background of very limited means, and I don't ever want to see myself in the situation that my parents were in. I want to have control.
I can definitely resonate with that one. That's my background.
It's a huge one. That's part of it. For some folks, it was, hey, I was an overachiever and I was just in that overachieving cycle so much that I didn't stop to take a breath and look at where it was taking me and realize that that wasn't a direction I wanted to be going in. For some folks, it was that they became victims of their own success. Hey, I needed to build up my practice. I never said no to anyone. I never said no to anything. Suddenly my practice was bustling, but I couldn't keep up. And things started to happen that made me second guess where I was headed. And then for some folks, frankly, it was the relationship. They said, look, I would not still be married if I kept up that same pace. I would not still be in a good situation with my kids if I kept up that same pace. For some folks, it was those milestones, right? Having a kid, getting married, getting divorced. Those things change their priorities. And for a lot of folks, it was hitting this point in their career where they felt like they were stuck. I think a lot of us hit that mid-career state where what we value the most all of a sudden is autonomy and flexibility. And if we can control where our time is, we feel okay, like allocating a fair portion of that to medicine. If we feel like we're out of control, docs, we're control freaks, right? That's how we do. You can certainly relate as a trauma surgeon. I definitely do as an emergency physician. Bringing control to the chaos is what we do best, right? And that's what we went into it for. And so when suddenly our life is the chaos, it can be really disconcerting and disorienting. And it can make you question everything. And so you hit this low point, you're burnt out, you don't know where you're headed. And these docs basically all decided they needed radical change. Some of them did it gradually by sort of subtracting. Some of them sold everything, relocated, started afresh. Some of them decided that they were going to go on a big pay down of their debt. And some of them just cut back and said, they may not love medicine the way they once did, but it's sustainable for them. And they can do it.
The one that was really impressive to me was the one who cut everything. It's the OB-GYN doc. I can't remember.
Yes. Jordan Craig.
She was going hard. And then she just said, you know what? We're done. We're cutting this. We're cutting that. We're cutting that. That's one that I'll put in the show notes. That is a really impressive one. And, let me ask you a question to Crispy Doc. It's funny. I'm calling you Crispy Doc, but if someone was just, learning about your blog and they just found your blog, like a lot of times there's a lot of different blogs that are, or even blog posts that are out there. And it's hard to kind of figure out where's the best place to start. So if someone was newly discovering your blog, what are some blog posts or areas that you think they should start off first?
Great question. So I think that, for anyone who's thinking about cutting back or thinking that their medical practice is unsustainable, the Docs Who Cut Back series, I think would be a great place to start. For folks who are maybe dabbling into, do I want to start my own investments and what do I want to do? I think there's a whole series on process of firing my financial advisor, a 3-part series early on that kind of goes through where I started, what my basically starting point of financial ignorance was, how we were able to really be appreciative of what the advisor offered us. Kind of like you and Renee, there was a point in time where we really benefited from having someone take it over. And then there was that point where we were able to take the reins and sort of, bump them off of the stagecoach.
So you took a more gradual approach. Okay.
I definitely was more gradual, but those would be posts that I'd start with. I keep a running list of physician finance bloggers just because there's now over 70 of us out there.
I did not know that there were that many out there.
It's amazing.
That's heartwarming. That's a really great feeling.
Look, I couldn't be more excited. A lot of folks say, well, don't you feel threatened? Because that's kind of people taken away from you. Not at all. I feel like, first off, some of those bloggers are like, those are my soulmates where they tell jokes. We're finance geeks together. It's kind of a little club. But part of it is just that, you're used to going into the physician's lounge, and the doc's lounge is basically full of people showing off their latest high-end purchase or talking about their hot stock tip. And I could never really relate to that. And now there's this geeky, frugal, thrifty virtual doctor's lounge that's out there that's got all of these different sort of small tail blogs that are like niches where you are very likely to find a voice that resonates with your own experience. You're very likely to find someone who can guide you on your journey and sort of help you understand that. And I couldn't be more excited that people are getting out into that.
I'm a big fan of what you just said. And you mentioned that a while ago when you were comparing yourself to the White Coat Investor. His blog is amazing. It's a great blog. It's been very useful to everyone. And, the fact that you mentioned, you're not trying to replace him, but what can you offer? I think the key things, and I'm sure you heard this at FinCon, and I've learned it with my podcast is I think the point of saying that there's no longer any more unique messages, right? Like there's so many different ways that you can get a message out, right? But I think now the key thing is the messenger, right? So you have a different way of expressing yourself. You have come from a different background. You have a different look on things. So I think, someone like me who similarly kind of came from an immigrant background, like I resonate more with your writing more because we have a similar background. Like you have a similar push, like you're an overachiever. And then all of a sudden, you get this pull back. You want to be closer to family and spend more time. Same thing with me. It's just like, I just didn't want to find out that I wanted to spend time with family when I'm in my 50s or when I'm estranged from my kids or, unfortunately, if I ever got divorced. So, I think that's really important too. And I really like what you mentioned with there being over 70 people. There are now so many unique messengers out there for everybody. I mean, if you're Black, if you're white, if you're from a different country, if you're LGBTQ, like there's someone out there for you. And it's a really heartwarming to know. That's very exciting.
It is. There's you can find an invisible friend out there that will connect with you, that will sort of reach you down deep in a way that just was never available before. And so I feel like that virtual doctor's lounge out there, it has an incredible resource. And especially for someone who, has questions or feels a little uncertain, there are so many people to reach out to. And this is, internet famous means that people are thrilled when you write them. People are thrilled when you leave a question in the comment section because these folks are so enthusiastic. They're basically doing it for free, right? As doctors, this is not going to be what frees you from medicine, the podcast for you, the blog for me, or at least not anytime soon. But it's something that we do because it's a passion project, because the day that we glide out of medicine, we could do this and enjoy this and feel like we were connecting with people on a level that will keep us fed in a very different way.
I want to ask you a question, and this is something I really want you to kind of expound upon on this podcast is when you realized that you were recognizing burnout, you also realized that you wanted to do medicine less. There was some questions that you had in your head that you write about that I think is really interesting. You asked yourself some key financial questions. And I think people who are listening, it's really hard for them to conceptualize, well, if I don't enjoy medicine, I want to pull back. What is my nest egg? What is my net worth? Can you go through some of those questions that you asked yourself and you answered to kind of figure out, how to get to yourself to financial independence?
Sure. So there's a stepwise process, and there are lots of folks that sort of explore how to do this on a step-by-step basis. I think the first thing you need to know is where the money's going, where it's coming from and where it's going. And so tracking your expenses is going to be key. And do that for maybe 3 months, maybe 6 months, just so you get a sense of what you're spending on. There are now apps out there like Personal Capital, where you basically enter your data. It's going to break down based on your credit card spending, what categories you spend on. So you may realize, oh my God, I didn't realize I was going out to dinner and eating out that often. Or, hey, I had no idea my clothes expenses were that high. And then the next question is, once you track your expenses and you have a sense of where things are going, you got to ask yourself, is this the way I spend according to my values? Meaning, what's important to me? If you had to write, these are 5 bullet points about the key core parts of me that are the most important things, this is what I'm about. You look at your spending and you say, does my spending reflect those values? And if it doesn't, you course correct, right? Hey, if you're about spending time with family, but you just spent what could have been an airline ticket to and from the grandparents once a year on shoes, that's something that you could reallocate. If your spending isn't paying down your debt in a way that's feasible, meaning if what you really want to do is feel secure because you came from a background where you felt a lot of financial insecurity, and that's something that happens to be your hot button issue, makes you nervous or, anxious out of proportion to most other people, what portion of your spending can you throw at that, sort of create that debt snowball and pay it down as quickly as possible so that you restore that sense of financial balance and security? The next question is, what am I building for? What's going to be my freedom number where I could launch and work would be optional? And the sort of landmark post on this that most people refer to as a touchstone is one on the Mr. Money Mustache website called, I think it's the astonishingly simple math behind early retirement. The idea is that if you save up about 24 times of your annual spending, you should be able to live off of essentially investment income. Now, I would say that's probably a less conservative estimate. Docs tend to be risk-averse people, so you probably want to save up a higher multiple of that. But once you've reached about 24x of your annual spending, you are in a position of power where you can start to decide, hey, do you want to dial it back and then just sort of build up that comfort buffer between when you're going to be able to comfortably stop working in medicine and when you feel like, hey, now I'm not going to deplete my savings and maybe I'll live a lifestyle that I'll be able to enjoy a little bit more with the spending. I'll be able to loosen the purse strings a little bit more. Those would be, I'd say, the first big steps to take. And then once you know what that number is, once you know what your goal is and what you're heading towards, you work backwards. You say, okay, how much am I saving each year? Working backwards, what's it going to take? And there are a number of online calculators that can estimate, based on what you'll get from the stock market returns, what do you expect that you'll be able to make in order to reach that target, and how many years will it take? And you very quickly realize that, hey, if you can become a super saver, if you can live a lifestyle that sort of incorporates a lot of frugality in it, you can set yourself up to reach financial independence and financial freedom much earlier than most. And especially with a physician's income, which is incredibly forgiving, you can make a lot of dumb mistakes, which a lot of us do and have.
I've been there, 2 physician household, living paycheck to paycheck.
It's amazing. And, we've all been there. You're so not alone in this need. We have all been there. And I think part of it is just you hit a point where you don't want to do what you've been doing all along, where it gets old. And that's when you're ready to embrace a change. Sometimes it'll be radical, like you were talking about with Dr. Jordan Craig. Sometimes it'll be more gradual. And sometimes you find the folks who have been, your role models. There's a prolific guest poster and commenter who goes by Vagabond MD, who's out there, who cut back significantly. He was the poster child. NIH funded research. He was the poster child for someone who was going to work until he was 80 and die at the physician table. And he's someone who realized, you know what? I'm not enjoying this the way I thought I would. Enough things are grinding me down. And as he dialed it back, he was able to find that actually it renewed his sense of enjoyment. So it's not his first love anymore. It's not the honeymoon period with medicine, but they're staying together. And that's a beautiful thing.
I love it. I love it. Now, here is where I get to use my privilege as a host to get some information from you. I'm going to be a little bit selfish. So I'm going to ask you for some advice for someone like me. Okay. So here's a scenario. I just turned 40, married. My wife is of similar age. I'll just leave it to you like that. That's it, right? And we recently got out of student loan debt. We just paid off about $662 in student loan debt. We are currently in the process of trying to sell a $140,000 townhome that we have, right? We documented it on Keeping Up with the Darkos. It was a home that I got when I finished medical school because I, quote unquote, thought I deserved a home, became an accidental landlord. The rest is history. We know how this goes. But, we were a little bit scared to start investing, right? So we have a financial advisor and so forth. And we have a great financial advisor, but we eventually want to take things into our own hands. So what's your advice for someone like me who now, has a little bit of debt, not too much, can handle that once the house gets sold, but I'm looking to get to that FI number. I'm looking to start investing. What's your advice for someone like me?
You're in a great spot. First off, I have to say, congratulations on getting out from under that debt. I remember reading the blog, and it was a mountain, and you and Renee should be incredibly proud of getting there. As for the house, you're not alone. That's a really common mistake. That's something that's easy to get past, and you're already in the path to selling it. I'd say the next step is just getting the confidence, right? It's hitting that next stage in financial puberty. I have 3 books that I talk about that I consider the holy trinity of physician finance. And they're sort of at 3 different levels where you could be a beginner and not know any of the terminology. You could be a math whiz and you could still get something out of these. The first one is A White Coat Investor by Jim Dolly. Definitely an important read. The second one is The Boglehead's Guide to Investing. You may not necessarily agree with all their tenets, but it's really accessible writing. It's really easy to understand, and it makes investing less scary. Because investing, it turns out, it's not about having this tremendous expertise and being able to know where the markets are going. It's really about just avoiding certain common mistakes, and they lay it out for you very nice and simply. The last one is William Bernstein, who's a neurologist that sort of fell into this finance wormhole and ran with it, and now is a very high-end financial advisor. But he writes these books for the unwashed masses of the rest of us that really give his wisdom. His book is called The 4 Pillars of Investing. And I think it is just incredible exploration of how to figure out what your risk tolerance is, how to control risk, and how to go from simple to complex sort of varieties of portfolios to understand what investing means, taken in the context of the history of investing and sort of understanding, okay, this is what's happened before. It's going to happen again. You're going to have some pattern recognition. So the next time that there's a terrible bear market and your stocks tank and you drop 50%, 40% in terms of your net worth, you're not going to panic and hyperventilate and, seal the damage by selling at the bottom of the market. And I think if you could start with those 3 books, that's going to be a huge, huge advantage. The other thing is pick a blog or 2 that speaks to you. Again, there's 70 out there. The White Coat Investor is a fantastic one. Physician on Fire, I'd say if you and your wife are interested in maybe early financial independence, he sort of outlines very clearly different comparisons between lifestyles of different doctors and sort of where that leads them over time. sort of plots out their trajectory financially. And so if you identify with either one of the lifestyles or with one of the end goals, hey, I want to be that one, that can help you kind of plan accordingly. Those are all great places to learn about investing in a place that is supportive, not terribly scary. Yes, you'll get some folks who are brilliant and a little intimidating on the White Coat Investor Forum, but you'll also get a lot of newbies who are asking basic questions. The last place I'd say is just to ask really smart people who mostly want to help you, are totally okay with a new person just putting something out there, is the Bogleheads Forum. That's an online group that you can join. It's free. It's basically a lot of smart, retired, financially successful people who know how to invest and who are really happy to take on mentees virtually through the internet. So I'd say any of those options is going to get you leaps and bounds ahead. And it may take you 6 months. It may take you a year. You have a real job and the podcasting job on top of it. It may take you a little bit longer, but any of those are going to get you to where you need to be to sort of take over the reins on that stagecoach of your finances.
Damn. I love it. Crispy Doc, thank you so much for giving me that piece of information. I really appreciate it. And I think a lot of people who are not even in my situation, the advice that you just gave right there, it's so relatable. And you like bring down like the level of stress so much, man. Like talk about, you brought out the incense for that one, man. I love it, man.
I was backing off on the massage oil. I thought that would be a little uncomfortable. I think that investing seems scary only because we don't know it. I remember going to these the financial advisor meetings where my wife and I would walk in and he would use a lot of jargon. And I mean, like we're doctors. We've studied jargon. We understand things. We can demystify things if we put our minds to it. But I would leave every meeting feeling like, boy, am I glad someone else is taking care of that? Because if something bad happens, I don't want it to be my fault, right? That's the scary part. Like, I'm sure you and Renee are going through this. Hey, if something happens and our net worth takes a dive, God, if that were our fault, that would feel awful. You got to build to sort of saying, no, if that were to happen, it's a natural cycle of the investing. It's what the market goes through every now and again, and it recovers. And as long as you're in it with a long time frame, we'll weather this storm just like we've weathered all the others, right? That shift in your mindset, it takes a while to get there and it takes a while to feel comfortable because it's scary. It's scary. It's your first chest tube all over again, right?
Oh, yeah.
You want a resident at your back saying, hey, let me guide you through this. Yeah, you're doing that great. Make the incision a little bigger. Makes all the difference in the world.
Well, it definitely sounds like, it's very obvious that you have a heart of a teacher. And I know you have a course that you just unveiled. Do you want to talk about that real quick?
Sure. So the idea is this is a course called Teach Me to Fish. And the idea is it's a financial literacy coaching service that I just put out. And basically, it's designed for folks who feel like they've been doing the reading, they've been following the blogs, they're sort of ready to take that big step, but they want someone looking over their shoulder, making sure that they do it right. I am not a financial advisor, and I'm not out to give financial advice. What I am out to do is help people demystify concepts that are out there. And that sometimes people just want, hey, could you take a second look at this? Did I calculate this correctly? Am I understanding this right? The idea is, hey, what are some simple, basic, lazy portfolios out there? Ways where you could set it and forget it. You can rebalance once a year. What are my options out there? I'm happy to help you look at the menu and then leave it up to you to decide what's right for you. I'm happy to take you through, just like we were talking about, how do I figure out what my financial independence number is? What steps do I take? The granular steps to get there, like, what do I do? Am I doing this correctly? I'm happy to be there looking over your shoulder and helping you understand what each of those mean. And I do want to make a distinction. Financial literacy coaching, it's not a substitute for a financial advisor. And there are going to be folks out there who feel much more comfortable with a financial advisor. There's nothing wrong with that. If you are going to get that advice, you want to make sure you pay a fair price for it. But my hope is that, hey, if your story resonates with my story, if you're someone who is at the point where you're ready to start that adulting journey in finance, I am more than happy to be your Sherpa and just show you the routes up the mountain so you could choose the best one for you. That's what it's about.
Love it. Love it, man. Excellent. And I'm sure you're going to help a lot of people along the way. Now, Crispy Doc, we're getting towards the end of the interview. Let's do some quick fast fire questions. You game?
Okay.
Ready to do this?
I'm ready to do this.
All right. We covered a lot of stuff now. Someone listening, I want them to walk away with one important thing. What's the most important thing you want people to learn from this podcast?
I am going to give you 2 for the price of 1 on here.
Okay.
I think the first one would be, as a doctor or frankly, as any sort of high earning professional, you can regain control of your time if you're willing to assume control over your finances. Not everyone will be, but that's one path where you can feel like you have that autonomy all over again. The second one is for those of us who are burnt out on our jobs and burnt out in medicine, you might just fall back in love with it if you do a little less of medicine and you do it more humanely. Makes all the difference in the world.
I love it. Mic drop point right there. Slow clap.
Right. See, and I'm the kind of guy where the mic will be dropped because I'm a klutz much more than because of
As long as it's just a mic and not a medical or surgical instrument, I'm good with it.
I appreciate that.
All right, Crispy Doc, knowing what you know now, what advice would you have given yourself as a pre-med?
I think I still would have done the same thing as a pre-med. I think I really like the social justice aspect of medicine. I'm sure you see this a lot in trauma surgery where you're taking care of folks at their worst moments.
Mm-hmm.
They may or may not be able to pay you, and you frankly don't think about that. You just take care of the patient, do what's right. So I think as a pre-med, probably what I would have said is I need to figure out how to extend living as a student for as long as possible, because that's what's going to set me up for financial success. If I would have thought about it, taken time to think sort of what are my core values and how can I make sure that my spending from the student level on up always stays consistent with those core values, and just shove the rest of that money towards retirement.
Love it. What's a personal habit that you are doing right now that makes you more successful?
I'll tell you, the biggest personal habit is I'm taking the time to make those connections that are important to me, that feed me and sort of make me a human being again. I spent last night doing karaoke with my kids. They're 9 and 11 years old. They were laughing at Dad trying to do Lionel Richie, and they were teaching me all kinds of new artists that I didn't know were out there. And I think those are the moments where you say, this is why that exchange rate of time for money, like I want the time at this point. I just want the time. So you're going to come to a point in life where you're going to feel like the money's not worth it. You want the time back, and you got to figure out what that activity is, karaoke with the kids, date night with the wife, and make sure that you spend time on that.
That's the most important thing I want people to get from this podcast too. That's a great point. I love what you just described there. It's great. If you had the opportunity to trade places with anybody, someone that you admire, someone that you find inspirational, who would you like to trade places with just for 24 hours?
Oh, this is a tough one. I don't know that I, see through their eyes maybe. I think I'd love to trade place again. This hero I mentioned before, Rick Hodes, he's someone who works in the Horn of Africa. He's basically taking care of kids with major spinal deformities, with cancer, with heart disease, and getting them the sort of care that makes all the difference in the world. And he lives, eats, and breathes medicine for these folks. I think I would love to just walk his shoes for 24 hours. I've been with him, but I think to be inside his head would be amazing.
Okay, cool. What's one life hack or just, any piece of technology that you use right now that's making your life a little bit easier?
I'm going to turn this one around a little bit. I think it's actually withdrawing from technology that makes my life better. I think there are those moments where getting caught up in the blog or getting excited about, a podcast coming up with Docs Outside the Box, you can get really caught up and spend a lot of time sucked into that world. And it's great to be passionate about that. But then eventually you feel someone kind of tugging on your shoulder and saying, hey, can we play? And you realize, what, I'm letting this suck me in a little bit too much. And I've got to sort of tend to those priorities and nurture the ones that are important. So I'd say it's knowing when to put the phone in the other room, put the computer, close it up, and go outside and enjoy the sunshine.
Love it. I want you to complete this sentence. Crispy Doc, I'm not just a doc, I'm a
physician wellness advocate
who's on his way to financial independence. Boom. If not there already.
Building up that buffer, building up that comfort zone. It's California. It's an expensive place. So I'm trying. I think it's a good place to be where I can have this glide path. I can let the nest egg grow, and I could sustain this sort of practice in medicine for a very long time to come. It's a healthy practice in medicine. And I hope a lot of other people can start to find ways to sort of build into their careers.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.